One of the things that we're hearing from them all the time is, at what age do they matter? When do they actually get a seat at the table? And I think that is a part of the challenge, because we're going to need their different way of thinking.
I think ultimately the church could be a place of transformative community. It could be a place where the way that we love one another points to something far beyond us.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora! Welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations with me, your host, Andy Dixon. Today we have two wonderful guests, Cathy and Stephen, the hosts of the Changes Ahead podcast, a Baptist New Zealand podcast where they host conversations discussing the changes the church needs to think about if it's to have a meaningful presence in the future. We fit a lot into this corridor, so we're going to pretty much dive straight in. We talk about unheard voices of our communities, the desire to be faithful by keeping things the same when perhaps faithfulness demands change, hearing people's stories rather than discussing theology abstractly, and why the church might be worth changing to save. If you like this conversation, then make sure you check out the Changes Ahead podcast. But now, this is episode 107 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Cathy and Stephen. Cathy and Stephen, kia ora, welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, Andy. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to be here.
And it's a real privilege, actually, to sit with both of you in this direction. Well, I've been on your podcast.
Yeah.
It's nice to return favour and put you on the other side of the mic. So, nor here queer. Tell us a little bit about who each of you are.
I've actually known Stephen for a long time, and I would like to say that he's my friend, but I have to admit that he was my husband's friend first. And so I got to know him because of their relationship. I think, Stephen, was he mentoring you in the era of youth? Yes. So it's quite a joy for me to be able to do this with Stephen and develop our own connection and our own unique way of relating. And I want to say that I got into this podcasting kind of by default. I think I got my arm twisted.
That's not fair.
So as I remember it, we were sitting in Stephen's lounge, and he'd been asked to do this podcast for the Baptist platform, and he's thinking, "Oh, I really need a co-host." So my husband Sean and Stephen were sitting there laughing, and he's typing something out, and then he goes, "Cathy, have a read of this," and then I read that they've written that Stephen's new co-host is me.
Nice.
So sometimes life is a little surprising, and I have to say I would never have put myself forward. So I am grateful for that kind of nudge.
Yeah, nice. And what's your background like? What were you doing before that? And
so my background, yes, I've actually in my first life of training, I trained in accounting. So I have that as my paid work. And then I trained through Carey College and did my theology degree, and came out of that and just realized I didn't quite fit the normal institutional way of doing church. And so we started our own journey of creating what we call our Sunday at 4 community, where we meet in our homes. And we've been doing that for the last 23 years.
wow, cool.
So a lot of our thinking has been born out of that time. And Stephen, you even were with us for a little while, so we've kind of influenced you too, haven't we?
And you survived.
Yeah. I survived, or Cathy?
No, Cathy survived.
Yeah, Cathy survived. Yeah, she did. It's quite incredible. Yeah. The other really cool connection that Cathy and I have, this was with Sean, is they did our pre-marriage mentoring.
Oh, nice.
And so they know us probably about as intimately as anyone else could. And so that has been something that has been really special actually for us, both pre-marriage and post-marriage. In the times where we get a little bit stuck, Sean and Cathy will literally swoop in from Auckland down to Wellington to kind of help us process stuff. So it's a really cool relationship, both from a podcasting perspective, but also just as friends and mentors.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so what's your background then, Stephen?
Yeah, so I also kind of in a almost feels like a past life, started in youth ministry kind of as an 18-19-year-old, and that's where I met Sean, who the youth pastor at the time actually said that I needed an external sort of mentor, supervisor, someone I could talk about my church context without risk of that getting back to the church context. So yeah, the frustrations and that sort of thing. So that's how I met Sean and eventually Cathy. Yeah, youth ministry, went through Kerry as well as a child. I'm not sure that I yeah, people in their early 20s, well, certainly me in my early 20s, Bible college was kind of wasted in a lot of ways, but it set a good foundation for me and my thinking, I suppose. Then I had some time away over in the UK, and I did some kind of boring but fun stuff, boring work but fun stuff, obviously, while I was away. Came back and kind of got dobbed into the going back into study theology and training as a pastor. I never really wanted to be a pastor of a church. I always loved and still love young people, adolescents, young adults. I hate that term, but that's people know what I mean. Because though those sort of age groups, they're still figuring stuff out. They haven't made up their mind on things, and so they're much more interesting to work with in a lot of cases. And yet I find myself as a sole pastor of a small church in Wellington. I've been here coming up 6 years, and love this place, love these people. It's hard work at times because it is a small community. The church in general, as we know, is struggling and it needs to change. And that's kind of where some of the ideas behind our podcast, the Changes Ahead podcast, kind of started to ooze out of me. And a friend of mine who was kind of trying to get podcasts started within the Baptist kind of online platform said, "Oh, why don't you do one?" So here we are, 4 years later.
It's a 4.
Yeah.
Crazy how fast it goes. So that's quite a different, I guess, way from the way I started, which was just, I'm going to start a podcast, and I started up, and like, who's going to listen to this? I don't know. I've got, you know, was there, along with his suggestion of like, you should do this, was there also support around, and we'll put it out there and we'll help support it, or like what's that work? How did that work?
Yeah, so he was looking to develop a podcast within the media space for us as Baptists, and so needed a guinea pig. And I guess I was the first person to say, yeah, okay, or maybe not first. I don't know. He might have been working on others as well. But in that first year, we were putting. Was it fortnightly, Cathy? Was it week?
Yeah,
no, it was fortnightly. Yeah, so
it was fortnightly,
as you've been doing for years, Andy. And so we almost killed ourselves that first year, I think.
Yeah.
But it was a way of kind of developing the platform there. I had been, this is my little claim to fame, I'd been a part of the producers group for the Bible for Normal People, which basically means I was giving them some money. But it meant that I was on, I think, a quarterly chat with the hosts, a Zoom chat with them. And so I kind of got some insight into what's involved in making podcasts and that sort of thing. And so that was, I was a bit of a nerd, and I did some audio training years ago, straight out of school, and so there's a geeky side of me that loves the production part. So so it's kind of how it developed.
And then you twisted Cathy's arm to get involved.
Certainly did.
That's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Awesome. Your podcast, The Changes Ahead, is all about the changes that need to happen in the church. And I was thinking about that. Like, change in the church is a really big thing. But change starts with individuals. And so I'm interested in, how has each of your faith changed over the years from, what I'm assuming you grew up in the church. That might not be the case, so let me know if it's not. But what's changed, or how has it changed for each of you over the years with your faith?
Yeah, so I did grow up in the church. I grew up mostly in a Baptist church, so that's kind of I was Baptist by accident, and initially at least. And so grew up in a family who took the Bible seriously, who encouraged kind of those what perhaps is now looked at a little bit old school as things like quiet times and prayer and Bible reading and that sort of thing. And there were times in my life as a child that I probably did that, and there were once I was a teenager I didn't do that, but I still kind of went along to church. And um, I would say that I had a pretty both my parents were from pretty traditional conservative backgrounds, and so that was how I was raised. The cool thing about my parents, though, is although they would have expected or hoped me to kind of agree with them, uh, they weren't afraid of questions. Particularly, Mum wasn't afraid of questions, and so there was a real gift in that to me of being able to go, okay. But what about such and such? And so it did mean that as I started going to Bible college in my early 20s, it meant that I was exposed to different theological ideas than I had been. And so the change for me it almost felt quite natural. Yeah, we've had conversations about deconstruction and that sort of thing. I don't feel I've personally been through a deconstruction process. I feel like it's been just a natural progression, I suppose, from one understanding to the next. And so I know that deconstruction can be really difficult for people, that kind of almost traumatic for people. And so I'm lucky in that I haven't had that. I've just had the space to ask questions, people to sit with me, and people to tell me when I'm being silly, but also people to go, yeah, keep exploring and keep figuring out why you think that, and come back to me and let's keep talking. So, and again, Sean and Cathy have been people who have been great at that within Sunday at 4 and outside.
I think that's really cool that that you've had that experience, because it means that you're then more primed to offer other people that experience.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not the sort of pastor who's going to, find questions threatening, or because you've been on that exploration. And so like that's almost says to me, this is the way that it could have always been.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've got all these people that are hurting from having to have pulled apart their faith and, tried to find any little thing they could grasp onto that they still believe, to me, that's really sad, because it could have been a lot more like your journey. And my journey's been very similar to that I've changed a lot of my beliefs, but it has been just a natural growth. Like it hasn't been hugely painful, but that's, again, I was blessed to be in churches where the pastors were asking questions and role modeling that. And so we actually were like, oh, you're allowed to ask questions. Oh, cool. What about this thing? So, yeah.
I think the other thing about my journey, and then I'll let Cathy share some of hers, is I've always been quite a cynical person when it comes to church. I think of times as a teenager, or even kind of in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, just going, this stuff we're singing, nobody believes this. But we're saying these words that actually have no meaning at all.
Like, I surrender all.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not.
Exactly.
I was just kind of going, I get that there's a cultural element to this, and there is, singing songs together is one of the few things that we do as a body, as the body of Christ in a gathered space. So it's not that singing is bad or anything like that, but I think my cynicism around singing and what we sing particularly, it was just, I was never going to be someone who just picks up what everyone's saying and going, yeah, that's what I think as well. And so, in fact, people in the youth group probably, after the fact, as they grew up, they've told me that their cynicism probably rubbed off on them a little bit too much. So, sorry, my cynicism rubbed off a little bit too much. But I think there's something to that as well. Yeah.
And I think that's why we get on so well, Stephen, is because that is my natural disposition, is to ask questions. And I remember as a teenager, the amount of times I wanted to raise my hand and ask a question. And I think when I met Sean, and the thing I didn't say at the beginning was that we did youth work for 10 years. So the same as Stephen, and that in that space, questions are welcomed, because we knew that that's what young people are doing. They're going, what is this all about? They're trying to make sense of their lived experience and the world around them. And so for Sean and I, all of that thinking just got continued to be fostered. And so I went to, when I went to study at Kerry, I was like finally relieved that I was actually welcomed to ask questions. I felt like I'd found my home. And then you go back to the church and that has to get shut down. And I think you're right. You're naming something that I think is so crucial, and it's both a barrier and an opportunity for us to move forward. And what I wrote down was we need to see questions as a way of being faithful. We need to reframe what does it mean to be faithful?
Yeah.
And that asking questions is it, because it's a way of evolving and growing and maturing into new understanding, because I don't think there's anybody in our churches who would say, I believe exactly the same thing when I was younger, because we naturally learn new information. And because we do, we go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And we change our minds. And we need to remove the stigma that says, oh, I got it wrong. No, that's what you knew then. And now you know something else. And now you can have a new perspective. So this place of questions is why we love doing this podcast, isn't it, Stephen? Because we get to bring people on and we say, ask away. And if you were saying before, what is it that I love about doing this? I love that I get to be a learner. I'm listening to someone else, and often these people, they're younger than us, and they're teaching us stuff. And I come away going, gosh, I hadn't thought of that. What a privilege. So alongside the idea that we need to question is this idea that no matter what age we are, we've got something to learn from someone else, and they've got something they can teach, as well as I've got something I can add, but I've got something to learn from them. If we could change that one idea, that I've got something to learn, can you imagine just what that could open up in our spaces?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think there's something really interesting about the fact that you've both been in that youth space and come out of that both with a real value of questions. Because I was thinking, as you were talking, I remembered back to a lot of my change in thought, or the end of the journey of my change in thought around the rainbow community was actually instigated by the fact that in a church that I was working in, the youth leader came and said, the youth group are asking questions about homosexuality. What do I tell them? What am I allowed to talk to them about? And some of the elders were very much like, this is wrong, why are we talking about it? But the senior pastor said, well, let's read up on it. Like, let's actually learn some things. And so he handed out books to the staff and said, read these. And for me, that was like the final thing that I needed to kind of push me over a line.
Cool.
But it came from the youth group asking questions, which I think there's so much scope for us to learn. And like you say, these young ones who are asking questions, instigating change for those of us who are older who have learnt different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful. So yeah, no, that's a cool connection. And I hadn't really thought of that. And then you've got these youth group kids who are asking these questions, and then they finish youth group and we expect them to stop asking questions now that you're in proper church. Yeah. Which just comes across as quite ridiculous. Basically. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Now, think really hard about this one. Who has been your favourite guest so far?
Oh.
No, you don't have to answer that.
Don't do that to us.
It was me, but anyway.
Yeah. Apart from you, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, apart from no.
Well, look, we have got one that probably was quite, quite triggering for us, don't you think, Stephen? We've talked about this before. Our very first one. It's an image that has so provoked us that we haven't been able to move on from that image, because it's quite so profound. So this was Nicole, And she talked about that the church used to be at the top of the hill, at the center of everything, at the center of our lives, a center of society. But now that it had rolled down the hill, and that we're doing everything possible to keep the building or whatever it is from rolling down any further. So all of our resources are basically spent holding this thing up. And you can just feel it, can't you? Even in that imagery, that we're just doing everything just to sustain it. And she said, what if you just stepped back, sat on the hill, did some grief? Because, there's so much richness and tradition. So it wasn't all bad. But if you did the grief and let it roll down the hill and smash into 1,000,000 pieces. And then when you're ready, you get up and just allow the Holy Spirit to move you and to pick up one of those shards and just start there with some good. And we just went, what?
Yeah.
And it did trigger, right? Because there's those of us, myself, included, and I've spoken to a number of peers who have been, going, all the whatabouts, right? The yeah buts, and I'm giving my life currently to holding this boulder up, and so to hear someone say, just let it go, that raises all sorts of questions for me, right? And so. It's both. It's been an encouraging and inspiring image, but it's been a haunting image. And because what am I holding on to personally that I'm not willing to let go of, or I'm scared of letting go of, or whatever? I think that's why it's resonated so much, because it both inspires and terrifies me.
Yeah, no, I remember listening to that episode and feeling very confronted. And even I was saying to someone the other day, they were talking about how fewer and fewer people are putting themselves down as Christian on the census these days. I said, actually, in some ways that really excites me, because when you look at history, the church has thrived the most when it hasn't been the seat of power. And yet we want it to be in the centre because we think everyone should know this good news. But every time it gets into the centre, it gets mixed with power. And it gets corrupted, and then we carry on with life missing kind of the heart of it. And yet there's these spaces around the world where it's not the centre of things. And I mean, when I interviewed the guys from Voice of the Martyrs, they were saying the fastest growing churches in the world are in Iran, in Algeria, and where was the other one? China. 3 of the places where it's hardest to be a Christian, and the churches are thriving. They're growing at an extraordinary rate. And yet we're over here going, but if we don't keep it the same, then it's going to be terrible. And it's like, well, how's the same working for you at the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's lots to change, which is, of course, why you have a podcast. It'd be really boring if there was only one thing to change.
And I just want to go back, because I think what we're raising is this, again, really big question around what does it mean to be faithful? And we've got this idea that being faithful is doing exactly the same thing that we've always done. And I think it's coming from a genuine place. I think people are genuinely wanting to be faithful. Yeah. And so we need some dialogue or some ways to kind of talk about that. Maybe faithful is when we can hear God telling us something new. But we're going to have to hear that and maybe hear it expressed in our churches.
Yeah.
And so so that does put some responsibility on what is being said from the pulpit. That can open up that dialogue that things have been changing, and that is the way of growth, and that our devotion can be reflected in hearing something new.
Yeah.
And that's where you kind of touched on the idea of power just before, Andy. And I think that's where the problem of power hasn't been wrestled with anywhere near enough for us as the church. And there's another comment that has haunted me for a number of years now by a pastor who was supervising me as I was doing my own training, who said, I recognize that my congregation is about 50 years at least behind where current kind of theology is sitting and the development of thought.
Yeah.
And he said, but I don't have the courage to go
Yes.
and
Sorry.
speak to that, because he knows how upset people would get.
Yeah.
And the topic that we were talking about, and it's almost something that I feel is laughable, except it's still real, is the way we read Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And how we can align or not, what science says and what the Bible says. And I think if we can't even talk about that within the church space, how are we going to talk about ethical issues? And so that, and yet, however many, let's say 10 years later, after I had that conversation, I feel that same tension in my role as a pastor who is responsible for the pulpit, for who says what in there, and so that could be just an indictment on my courage as well. But it's a real thing, right? Like, how do we pastorally care for people from a place of power, but also nudge them on, encourage them on into a space where they might be thinking something quite different to what they have in the past, so they can become more transformed into the likeness of Jesus that you talked about.
Yeah.
And so it's a constant tension for me as a pastor, that the podcast gives me a little bit more freedom to be able to say, well, yeah, maybe this, or at least invite someone else's perspective to say something that maybe I think that is harder for me to say because of the political nature of a church institution.
Yeah. I
So,
guess that's the beauty for you guys, is that you're not coming on here just telling us all what you think. You're coming on and inviting other people to share and then asking them questions about that.
which has been really intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
As well as, I mean, that's a way of uplifting a voice that often I don't think is heard very much, certainly within in the Baptist space. Yeah, the voices of that first year, I think we were aiming to only to speak to people kind of in their 20s. I can't remember exactly if we did that, but that was the goal of hearing voices that, if they're not in formal leadership positions, they're never going to be heard by church people. And so let's offer a gift, the gift of their voice to the church. We don't have to agree. We don't agree with everything that our guests have said, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. We don't need to argue with them.
Yeah.
But what can those voices say to us, and how can we, as people of privilege because of age and status and all that, and position, all that sort of thing, give voice and space to other voices?
And the power of their voice is that they're living in a world that has, I mean, we know it's changed. It's changed socially, technologically, scientifically, in ways that we can't even catch our breath. But that's the world they know. And so hearing from them is giving us some insight, because, well, they don't know any different. And it doesn't mean that our voice still isn't important, that we've got some wisdom, but we need that interplay between what they're actually experiencing on the ground to help us navigate the change. And so one of the things that we're hearing from them all the time is, at what age do they matter? When do they actually get a seat at the table?
Yeah.
How many of them are actually on boards helping, planning for the future when it's going to be about them? Are they actually there?
Yeah.
And I think that is a part of the challenge, both the challenge to go forward and the barrier, because we're going to need their different way of thinking.
Yeah.
For some of the big, challenges that are facing us.
And it's almost like those of us who have roles need to learn how to use them to get out of the way. Or to make a way for those people, and using our position of privilege to step out of that space and let someone else step into it, which I guess a lot of people are threatened by.
Yeah.
And I guess when it impacts your livelihood, then there's some real stuff around that,
And that was something Steve and I were going to mention is, what do you do when your livelihood depends on it.
Yeah.
Even if you are wanting to bring some diversity into the conversation, what do you do when that's your paid job?
Yeah.
And it was one of the things that when we started out doing our Sunday at 4 journey, we realized that in not being paid, we took all of that away. We're able to bring things and ask questions and change things, knowing that it's not going to affect our livelihood. So that is a big barrier, and we don't quite know how to address that.
And that's really personal for me, right? Like I as someone who is called by a church, and that's my sole space of income, or source of income, sorry, I should say. How do I navigate not just what a congregation wants, but actually what is best for them as individuals, for them as a community, but also the tension of the church being a prophetic witness to the reign of Jesus in the world, which is going to upset some things, right? As as we've seen, as we see if the church is really active in the way that perhaps I'm saying judgmentally it should be, and so there's just this constant tension, and again I come back to the problem of the power that I have because I'm in this role, but also that others have because they are the ones that are paying me to be in this role. And it's tricky. And sometimes I honestly think maybe just being in the role is a part of the problem. And I'm just perpetuating a problem by choosing to be in the role. I feel that at times. But also I have hope as well that by being present, by stewarding a congregation well, hopefully faithfully, that could be transformative for those people and the neighborhood around us.
Yeah. And like we were talking about before we started recording, that what you don't want is a whole lot of people who are open to change opting out because it's too hard and leaving it up to all the people that aren't willing to change.
Sure, yeah.
Because otherwise nothing ever changes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think, one of the big things for me is even just helping people come to that understanding that change is good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially, as I've moved into an institutional church, coming from the non-denominational space into the Anglican Church, which has got a lot of history to it, and a lot of people who like the way things have been done, and some people like the service that was written in 1662. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. There's hundreds of years of history to some of our services, and yet at the same, so I'm walking this fine line of going, what do we change? But how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater?
That's right.
But how do we also go, yeah, but our churches are getting older and older and older because people who are younger aren't finding this engaging in any way. So, and why is that? And I think that's one of the things I really love about your podcast is that by talking to these younger people, you're not just talking about what changes could we make for the church to attract people. What you're doing is saying, what are the things that really matter for these people? And do they find them in the church or not?
Yeah.
And if they don't, then we're just ruling out an entire generation of people if we're not willing to change. What was your hope when you set out on this journey?
Yeah, apart from all the fame and fortune that comes with podcasting,
and the money,
yeah, exactly, yeah. I think for me, as I first started to dream about it, as when I was invited, it was just about giving voices to people that we don't hear from. That was the hope. And I didn't know what the result of that was going to be. I assumed that was going to be confronting and challenging at times. But that was the goal is how can we be hearing from people who are, for better or worse, and still within the system enough to care about it enough to come onto a podcast and go, hey, what about? So for giving voice to those we aren't hearing from was the main goal.
Yeah.
I don't have delusions of grandeur, I suppose, of suddenly seeing us change the church. It's hard enough for me to do that in a particular context that I'm trying to minister in, let alone in an online space that, who knows really how many people are listening, because I'm not convinced by the stats that Spotify and all those throw up, because they start counting it like 15 seconds of listening or something ridiculous like that, right? So I don't actually know how many people are listening to us, but we also have had people say, actually, that was really helpful to hear. So we know that there are a handful of people at least who have appreciated hearing some of the episodes, and so that's probably fulfilled the hope for me. But Cathy, what do you reckon? Anything else? Have I stolen it all?
For me, I think it's just been the joy of being able to have these conversations and to feel like I'm part of something again, a little bit bigger than me, because, I've got my Sunday at 4 community and I love that. But to feel like I can take that conversation broader, that has given me a lot of encouragement. Like, there are other people thinking like us. Oh, yay. So the encouragement is for me, but also hearing people go, I don't feel so odd, because they're hearing some of their questions and thoughts being discussed, and they're going, oh, there are other people like me. So I feel like I'm part of that, just as a different way to be able to hold people in a space to say, yeah, it's okay. We're on this journey together. And I love being a part of that, just fostering that kind of encouragement and goodwill. And just hope that it's part of this idea that I've always had this idea of seed theology, that we're seeding. And then we can trust that that's going to produce, part of something.
Yeah.
That can, that I don't have control over how it grows, but we can be a part of that seeding process.
And that's such a beautiful way to look at it, because then that takes the pressure off to have to see the plant through to fruitfulness or whatever. You just get to do the bit
that's in front of us.
Yeah. This is what's in front of me now. This is the bit I'm doing. Pressure's off from the rest of it, which I think is good. But also, it means you can do the bit that's in front of you really well, because you're not trying to do all of it.
And I think what you were saying before about, we don't want people to get so disillusioned that they completely, walk away from it all. And sometimes people have to, and I understand that. But if we can say, well, if we just do this little bit and you do your little bit, it feels doable when at times when it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because bringing about change in an institution that has been around for so long, sometimes that change feels like, how on earth is it going to happen? And what gives me encouragement is if there's more of us just doing a little bit here and a little bit, I think all of that will add up to something more.
Yeah.
The other thing this podcast is, which is not part of the plan, but what has emerged, is it's given voice to people who are able to share their story within the Baptist world that we're in. And so if it's something that is confronting in their story, that's much easier to sit with than me just pontificating about an issue. And so we've been able to, I would say, have some episodes that will have pushed buttons within the Baptist space, but because it's actually the experience of the person we're talking to who's a part of the family, it's meant that we've been able to have some harder conversations that, at least in our space, haven't been able to be had in a broader area, because it's just too controversial or fiery or whatever. And so I think that's been an unintended gift as well. Like it's what we've learned is actually, if we're sharing people's stories, well, that's cool. Let's hear those stories. And so that makes some things a little easier to digest, perhaps, that might not have been might not have been otherwise published, shall we say.
I'm really big on that of, let's stop discussing theological issues without hearing the stories of the people who we're discussing.
Yeah.
If we can't listen to their stories, we shouldn't be discussing it.
Yep.
You know, that, or we shouldn't be, not that we shouldn't be discussing it, we shouldn't be adamant that we're right about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is probably a better way to put it, that we should be discussing it, but part of that discussion needs to be hearing the voices of those who are impacted by our theology. And so you guys do that really well. You bring people on, they tell their story. You asked how things have impacted them, and it's hard to hear that and not then think about, well, how does what I believe affect people? Which I think there's a huge value in what you're doing in that space. When I was talking to Jamie Van Gemeren, she's been on your podcast a few times.
3 times, yes. She's the only three-peat we've had.
Yeah. So she was a guest a couple of episodes ago, and was sharing that Metanoia's recent event was asking, should the church be saved? They'd done a whole lot of, can the church be saved from X?
Yeah.
And then they asked, well, should the church be saved? Given that your podcast is asking about the changes ahead, it kind of assumes that there's a yes in there, but a yes, but because you need some changes ahead. So I guess my question for you guys is, what makes the church worth saving for you?
I think ultimately for me, the church could be a place of transformative community. It could be a place where the way that we love one another points to something far beyond us.
Yeah.
I think Jesus said something about that. And ultimately, that place of belonging, of love, doesn't mean sameness. I think that's probably one of the biggest myths that I grew up believing, that we were all just going to be the same, right? If we all just could get this idea down, we finally figure out what that particular Greek word meant in its context, and therefore what it means now, then we'll finally be there,
Yeah. And once all the other churches become Baptist.
Exactly. Well,
yeah.
Hey, you said it, Andy, not me. I'm glad someone finally has.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, I think the first Baptists back in the 1600s actually thought that there certainly was an arrogance to the way we started.
We all do that.
That in some ways, I think we still hold. But that's the if we could actually just stop and learn what it means to love one another, and I'm going to love you even when I fundamentally disagree with you. I'm not saying that's easy, because I find that freaking difficult. And oh man. But if this is a place of safety to practice that, and actually when I got it wrong, you were able to say to me, Andy, Stephen, I know that we're here to try and figure out how to love one another well. When this happened, this is actually what happened for me. And I'm not going to be going, well, no, it's just because you're wrong, right? It's just, if you just behave differently. And actually, we could be pointing other people around us to a reality that surely is going to be transformative of our world. So that's, I mean, I say this stuff, it's really easy to say, and it's nice to say. It almost feels a little bit idealistic and almost just too much of a fantasy. But if we could be on that journey towards that, then that for me is a place of hope. And yeah, so I don't know, that's probably where my gut goes. But there are certainly times where I don't know that I can answer that question positively of should it be saved, because there are far too many things around our country, around the world, that the church is doing. And I can't go, oh, that's just them, right? Because they represent me, because I'm a part of that. And so I want to distance myself, but I can't. As soon as I distance myself from that, then I'm actually just perpetuating the problem again of going, oh, no, I'm not one of those Christians. And that's not something that is transforming me into a more loving person, or inviting conversation, that sort of thing. So that's my idealistic hope, I suppose.
Yeah. How about you, Cathy?
something that's been really standing out to me just recently is a conversation that we're about to release this month. And this was an interview with Hazel. And I think I really felt that listening to her was a word in season for us. And she talks into the space of the skill needed to engage with online bullying. And she talked about that and then related that to how we could take some of the skill that they use and put that in our churches. And I just went, if we could, as the church, my hope is, if we could, as the church, learn how to sit in that difference, in that, and I'm going to use the word friction. Friction is the place where we can sit with that difference and know that it's okay, it's uncomfortable, but it is the place where real transformation can happen. It's in those places. But we need skill. We're going to need to learn how to hold ourselves, like Stephen just said. How do you hold yourself when someone's saying something that you disagree with and everything inside you wants to shout at them? How do we do that well? So the question is, how do we disagree well and create spaces like that? And I think that could transform us. Because until we do, we've got nothing to offer the world. I mean, at the moment, that's where everything is falling over, where people do not know how to disagree well. And I've been practicing even this one idea of when I go into the conversation, what if I try not to change them? I know that sounds simple, but I'm just going, what if I try not to do that? And I just do this one thing, be curious and ask questions. It absolutely changes my stance and changes the whole feeling of that conversation. So could we learn how to do that? But going back to what I said before, we're going to have to teach our congregation what it feels like to feel uncomfortable and how do we hold that without retreating to self-defense or whatever else we feel in that moment. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Uncomfortable is necessary if we're going to move forward.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, you're right. It's teaching people to really get that.
Yeah.
And so the more we can get people into that uncomfortable space and then finding the growth that happens in that space. But you're right, because people avoid friction like the plague.
Absolutely. It's being the thing that we do the most. We avoid it.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm not sure how much this has come out in our episodes, Cathy, but I know it's something that you and I talk about a lot. The concept of lament.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And actually being able to hold the grief or the anger or whatever it might be that we're feeling within a space of worship.
Yeah.
As the Bible kind of teaches us to, for those of us who take that seriously. I think that would be a massive change for us and giving space to the voice of those who are hurting and any other describing word for pain and that. But we are so afraid of those feelings.
Yes.
Because they are uncomfortable most of the time. And yet we all have them. But this concept of leaving our baggage at the door, I don't even know where that came from. But I remember that was kind of something that I'm not sure if I was ever taught it, but certainly I used to think it, that I have to leave my crap at the door of the church so I can now go and focus on Jesus. Well, that's not how Jesus seemed to act with the people he encountered. And so, yeah, I wonder how much, and I know I've got stacks to learn as far as curating this kind of worshipful space, but how much can lament transform our communities? Because we're actually able to say, it makes it a huge issue, say wars around the world at the moment. We can talk about the fact that we are lamenting the the violence and the death wherever it is, and it doesn't have to become about a particular taking a particular side. Now, I still think there is a place for taking sides, and so I'm sure people are thinking about a particular war at the moment as I'm speaking, and so there is clearly evil going on, but actually, how can we bring our laments and our anger and our sadness, whatever it is, into a space and have that be a part of our worship?
That's actually super encouraging for me, because this Sunday I'm getting my people writing laments during the service.
Brilliant.
As part of our Lent practices.
Right.
So,
Well, and that's again something that we miss within the kind of the Baptist tradition. I mean, actually, more churches are engaging in Lent, but that there's a season of space that within the church calendar to give to that in the lead up to Easter.
That was one of those baby out with the bathwater things for me that I discovered this thing in my 30s and went, this is an amazing framework. You don't have to all do it the same way, but
that's right. Yeah,
there's some stuff that's really helpful.
And that's some of the stuff, like you said, that we've forgotten, some of the really older traditions that we haven't brought in today. And just talking about the laments, I mean, a third of the Psalms are laments.
Yeah.
So it's baked in. Mm-hmm. And so I call that we need a spirituality that befriends reality.
That's beautiful.
Because that's part of what is missing. It's what you're saying, Stephen. People are coming into our services feeling all these feelings, and there's no place or no spirituality to hold that, to say, of course there'll be times when we feel uncertainty. Of course there'll be times when we're feeling sorrow. And we just don't understand what's going on. And if we don't have the language which can hold people, then I think there's only one place they can go, and they'll think that they're doubting because they're not being certain, or they're not feeling all the right feelings. Yeah. So, a spirituality that befriends our reality, that could do so much to hold what people are experiencing.
I really
and
love
validate their experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Because you're right. That's when what's happening in the church is disconnected from what's happening in their lives, and that's what a lot of these people coming on your podcast to talk about is, if the church wants to engage, these are the things that are actually going on in life for all of us. What are you going to do about it?
If we can't engage with those people, how on earth are we going to engage with people who don't share the same faith worldview?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
What's
next for Cathy, Stephen, and the changes ahead?
Well, we're still going, and we're releasing monthly episodes because we found last year a little bit more manageable with monthly. I think you were saying in one of your episodes recently, Andy, that monthly or the fortnightly frequency certainly is far too.
Well, now that I'm full time,
exactly right.
It changes things.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And so, we're really excited about the episodes that we've got in the can already, and the conversations we'll be having. But specific. I don't know what's ahead. I mean, one of the things that we've dreamed about, and I know it would be cool to do something in person. I don't know what exactly that looks like. I went to Theology Bear Camp in Denver last year, which is Trip Fuller and the Homebrewed Christianity crew, and there were 600 people who getting together and having conversations about actually what needs to, not quite in our changes the headway, but effectively what changes are needed. What's the really deep theology that is going to form us? So what could if there was more of a groundswell of us, of people like yourself and your listeners, Andy, and ours, and there's obviously other podcasts around the country, that would be fun. So I'm going to put that out there.
Yeah, cool.
Let's make that happen. I don't know when, but we've talked about that a few times together, Cathy and I.
Yeah, we've definitely daydreamed and thought, wouldn't that be cool? Why do we have to go to the States? Why can't we have it here and be a part of our groundswell? Yeah. So yes, anyone listening, if you think this is a great idea, please let us know. Yeah. Would you be in?
Yeah,
I'm in.
Cool.
That's awesome. Lastly, how can people find you, follow you, listen to you, Where do they go?
Yeah. So at Changes the Headcast is our social handle. As in the at symbol, Changes the Headcast, because unfortunately the podcast was taken when we were setting that up. And through the Baptist website, baptist.nz/podcasts, we're there too. But yeah, Apple, Spotify, I think it's on YouTube now. So yeah, just Google Changes the Head podcast, and you'll see some funny mugshots of Cathy and I probably at some point.
Oh, thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat today. Thank you for your podcast and all that brings into the world, for the people that are feeling heard because they're listening to your podcast. Thank you on their behalf. Thank you for what you're doing to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
Thank you. It's been fun to chat.
Hello, hello heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
There are so many great conversations on the Changes Ahead podcast, so please do go and check that out. Cathy and Stephen, thank you both for who you are and for what you do. Here is a blessing for you. Cathy and Stephen, as you continue to host these conversations, may those who you host feel empowered that their voice is being heard and that their thoughts and experiences matter. May your listeners be encouraged to ask even more questions, to challenge the status quo when they see it excluding people or dismissing people, and to continue to explore how the church can be transformational communities of love. May your podcast prompt discussion among church leaders, in the Baptist movement and outside, and may those discussions lead to real and significant change to the ways that we as churches exist in the world. For your own faith communities, may you continue to lead in ways that help people explore a life of faith together, learning to grow in life and love for one another and the communities around them. May you both feel loved and supported in your leadership, a role that can be draining and lonely at times. And may the love of the divine fill you on both your strongest and weakest days. May you both continue to see the fruit of faithfully questioning, of opening spaces for the voices seldom heard, and of seeking to find the changes ahead. Lastly, may you both know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. Join me next time when I talk to Philippa Hunt, founder of Satisfy Food Rescue. We talk about why she started Satisfy, what they do, and how that connects with her faith. We talk about the incredible stats of food wastage in the world while many go hungry, and about finding your lane in order to do the most good. It's a great conversation. Do join me. Until then, me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Homai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangi a mātou I te ki